My name's Frank. I'm alcoholic.
Hi, Frank.
I'm grateful to be here today, and thanks, Becca. That was cool. So, a little nervous, kind of weird. It's probably the setting. This place does something to me. Anyways, so by raise of hands, people in the program less than 5 years? Cool. I had a guy explain to me one time that less than 5 years in the program, he didn't talk about sobriety, he didn't talk about any of that stuff. He just said less than 5 years in the program is a newcomer. And I believe that today. And I'll explain that to you here in a second. For me, I came into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous in 2002. Came off a pretty bad run. I bring that up because I think it's very important. It's important for a guy like me to stay in contact with that past and what that was and how that worked and what it does, right? So, for me, the deal, I grew up in an alcoholic home, so I was alcoholic way before I picked up a drink. It's a generational thing in my family. The men usually get jobs, get drunk, go to jail, get jobs, get drunk, go to jail, get jobs, get drunk, go to jail, and that's kind of like a badge of honor on my dad's side of the family, which is crazy, and there's a couple parts in the book that talk about that. One specifically that hit me when I first started was when they talk about, in the doctor's opinion, they talk about the alcoholic life being the only normal one. And that hit me with a load when I heard that the first time, you know what I'm saying? Because it was totally normal for me as a kid to watch my dad jump on a county sheriff's hood, drunk, out of his mind, totally. And it was even more acceptable for my grandma, who we lived with at the time, to totally defend him at the door and not let him in unless they had a warrant, you know what I mean? And most 60-year-old women don't do that shit, but that's what happens in my family, and I remember growing up knowing that we were different, but just thinking that was the norm in a way, you know what I mean? It was normal for my dad to piss away his whole check, come home remorseful, get in a fight with my mom, end up going to jail. I mean, I knew that was going to happen probably every other month. He'd end up in jail for something that he did, usually, and I remember the car rides of picking him up and bringing him home. It was so awkward and tense, because she was picking him up. He hadn't been home in a month, or not a month, but a week. He didn't have a check left, and this is what we did. You know what I mean? This is how we lived, and like I said, it seemed the normal one to me, the normal way to live. I believe that every person on this earth has defects of character. I just believe that we use ours better than they use theirs on the outside. You know what I mean? So I grew up in that home, and it was totally normal to figure out how to handle a situation with anger. That was always number one. That was number one. The number one deal is when you wanted somebody to respond, you got pissed off at them. You raised your voice, you raised your hand, you did what you had to do to get their attention. So I picked that up at a young age, to be dishonest, to get what you want. That was another thing that we did in my house. To hold people against their will emotionally. My mom's the queen of shame. She can make you feel ashamed for enjoying a sunny day. You know what I mean? And that's just how we did it. That's how we did it. It was very dysfunctional, but in my mind, a happy household. Honestly, and I hear a lot of people in and outside of the rooms, and they talk about how bad their childhood was. I'm not one of those people. If anything, today I look at it, I learned a lot, just in a different way than most people learned. You know what I mean? And I'm grateful for that today. Fast forward, a series of events happened in my life. Pick up my first drug. As a kid, they would give us drinks. Christmas, we would bug, let us have a drink, they'd let you have a drink, but it wasn't this big deal. Alcohol didn't have this big effect on me at that time. But the first drug that I used a drug first. I used amphetamine for the first time at a real young age with a family member, and it totally rocked my world. I remember being just, I remember it igniting this alcoholism, And at the time in my family, there was some crazy stuff going on. My dad was in jail. It was a high-profile case. It was on the news. There was a lot of stuff going on because as my mom and dad's disease progressed, things, of course, got a lot worse. And there were no more jobs for him to lose, and there were no more cars for us to fight in, and to pick him up in jail. He'd hit the big time, and he was on TV, and the whole deal was bad. It was bad, and I carried a lot of shame for that for a long time, and picked up the drug, right with the same time, picked up that first drug, and that totally totally changed the way I looked at the world. I mean, it did, and that's a fact, you know. But you can't use speed that way all the time. You know, and a 14, 15-year-old kid, I didn't have the resources to use it that way all the time. And the shame that I picked up from using it that way that first time stuck with me, you know. I remember having the thought, thinking to myself, if I could feel that way every day and nobody knew, I'd totally do it. Well, 2 weeks later, alcohol presents itself to me. Go to a party with some friends, totally get wasted. First time I get drunk, I drink a fifth of Montego Rum Bay, the good stuff, you know what I mean? This shit tastes like alcohol, rubbing alcohol, you know? So I drink the whole fifth, totally get wasted, fall down, cut my eye, try to kiss my best friend's girlfriend. He intervenes, I kiss him instead. It's like, you know, and was totally okay with it. Like, of course I did. What do you expect me to do, you know? My buddies pick me up, they throw me in the back of a pickup truck, they take me home, they knock on the door and they take off. Because my mom is in the middle of the same deal that I'm going through emotionally with what's happening with my dad, and she comes out, and I'm passed out. I've got puke in my hair and a cut on my eye, you know, and she just comes out, and you know, you guys know when you're so drunk that you can't move, but the mind's still working, like you know what's going on, but you're so drunk that you're just, you know, you're dying. That's a straight up overdose of alcohol. And I'm laying there and I'm thinking, God, she's going to start hitting me. I've seen what she's done to my dad. She's pretty tough, you know what I mean? And she grabs me and she just starts bawling. And I'll never forget her saying, not you. You're not supposed to end up like the rest of them. She's saying shit like that, thinking that I'm passed out. And I'm in my head thinking, end up like who, you know? I found it. This got me through it. I had what the book calls a phenomenon of craving. I had that because I had 2 or 3 drinks and I drank the rest of the bottle. There was some ego involved. It was cool to be the only 15-year-old that could chug a whole bottle. You know what I mean? Those 4 minutes were terrific before that shit hit me. You know what I mean? And then I slid into that deal where the body warmed up, the mind fired up, I exploded, you know, and I was living the dream that we live, you know, and I walked on 6 inches above the ground for an hour, you know, and several times had that thought in my head, oh my God, this is it. I don't care that he's in jail for murder. I don't care what's going on at this party. I don't care. This is it. I had that release in my neck that I think only an alcoholic gets from alcohol, because I was free. She's bawling, not again. You know, I wake up the next morning and I'm jacked. I'm hurting for certain, you know, and she's sitting there and I said, no, Mom, it's cool. It's totally cool, you know. I got it out of my system. I mean, I remember the lies that were coming out of my mouth, I was even impressed with, like, holy shit, this is good stuff. She'll fall for this, you know. And as that takes place, in my mind, I swear to God, I'm thinking, when can I drink again? Because I can't use speed the way that I used it, you know. Like I said, I didn't have that. I didn't want to deal with the shame, you know, because speed had destroyed my family, you know what I mean? But alcohol, God, nothing bad ever came from alcohol, you know what I mean? And from that point forward, I used alcohol whenever I could. I never said no. Did I get totally wasted every time? I didn't. You know, I didn't have the resources or the time. But every time I could get wasted, I can honestly say that I did. I mean, and that was the fact for me. So fast forward a couple years, 16 comes. At that point, pretty athletically inclined. That was my first escape. That kind of saved me from what was going on at home. But once I took that first drink, everything became secondary. Playing football became secondary. You know, hanging out with my friends that didn't drink became secondary. The drink was the primary purpose of my life at that point. And I can honestly say that. You know, and I didn't have those thoughts at that time, and this is all in hindsight, step work, and BSing with other alcoholics and addicts, but I figured out, everything becomes secondary from that point. My life totally changed. The direction of my life totally changed. I was in a meeting Sunday, and a guy started talking about drinking by himself, and it took me back to a thought that I hadn't had. I remember being like 16 years old. We lived in an apartment complex, and I usually steal beers from the party that I was at, or I was always the one that cleaned everything up at the end of the party, because there's no way I was going to let anybody else get that stuff. You know what I mean? I remember going down, they had this like a big aisle of storage sheds at the apartment complex. I remember going there at like 16 years old and having 6 or 8 beers and a pack of cigarettes and just drinking and smoking by myself and being like, fuck yes, 6 whole beers, you know what I mean? And I remember the security that I had attached to that alcohol, because I knew what it was going to do for me. I knew it, you know. And at 16, it's not normal to go drink by yourself. Even my buddies that were potential alcoholics at the time, they didn't have that behavior, you know. And I would go do it. I'd totally go do it. Catch a buzz, smoke a pack of cigarettes, go back home and listen to my mom bitch about my dad. You know what I mean? And it would be totally okay. I think that's what makes me different than them, is that the effect that it produces on me is something that in the moment I can't see, but in the moment I have to have. Totally have to have. So fast forward, drinking becomes the primary. And I love the word that I love is partying. I always still fire up a little when somebody's in a meeting and they say, God, I remember when I used to party. That part of me that wants to deny my alcoholism says, oh yeah, that's what we were. We were a partier. I love that word, you know. Yeah, it was so much fun. For me, a series of events from that drink just, like we talk about in the rooms, it just progressed. It got worse and worse and worse. 17 years old, I had already done about half of the things that they talk about and more about alcoholism. I had sworn it off. I was only going to do it on the weekends. I could not drink whiskey. That was my big deal. As long as I didn't drink whiskey, everything would be okay. This is 17 goddamn years old. You know what I mean? I remember the first time that I read those, and I'm like, are you kidding me? I did that. I did those things. I'll hang out with these people. I won't hang out with these guys. I'll smoke weed with, I'll do this. I'll do that. It became this huge puzzle of things that I tried to do to figure out how to chase that. Because for me, when I drank, I've never suffered from a blackout, and I'm pissed about it. I hear people talk about blackout, and I think, you lucky bastard. I relived every horrible thing that I did. I totally did. Every time I hurt somebody, which was a big part of my story, especially in my teen years, I'd drink, and that's what I went out and did. Every time that I lied and manipulated and sold my soul to get high one more time, I remembered every one of them. I totally do, you know. I got to a point at about 18, in between that, Chanel and I had hooked up, saving grace for each other. We're there, we're like mom and daddy and each other because all of our parents were in prison or rehab or wherever, So we hook up, and this perpetual disease just starts growing and growing and growing. We move in at 16, we got our own place. My younger brother comes in and lives with me because where he was at home wasn't good, and I always maintained a job. That was my deal. I remember that same stuff, that the storylines that I picked up from my dad and his brothers, It's like, as long as you have a job, you're fine. Doesn't matter if you beat her up. Doesn't matter if you go to jail. Doesn't matter. As long as you work and you can provide for your family, you're okay. So I had that, and that's what I do. Didn't miss work for a hangover. I mean, there was several times she'd drive me, and I'd be throwing up out the window because I drank till 3 in the morning, and it was 5:30 and time to go to work, and I would refuse not to work because in my mind, somewhere subconsciously, I had that thing going on that if I didn't go to work, then it was really an issue. I know it was in there because I refused to not go to work for it, And I almost had this part of me that wanted to suffer through it. There was this part of me that said, you're going to play the game, you're going to pay the price, So for me to be hungover 5 days out of the week, totally. I do that all day long. And I was a heavy equipment operator, and I worked around foul, stinky stuff. I was a garbage man. I could come in hungover out of my mind and eat a tuna fish sandwich and drive that truck like it was no tomorrow. You know what I mean? And it was this stuff that I had to set up in my head to justify my behaviors that I was doing at night, So Chanel and I, this thing kind of moves on. It gets bigger, it gets bigger, it gets bigger. I get to a point that I'm drinking and all the time, whenever I can, all night long. As soon as I get off of work, it's drink, drink until I go out, basically. Not necessarily pass out, but just always every night get a good serious dose of alcohol. What happens for me, though, is the same effect that has on anybody that drinks that much. I do things that I totally regret, that I don't want to do, and I do them over and over and over, And this is a great example of how my thinking works. So one time, the alcohol is getting out of control. Chanel and I are fighting. My hands are swollen. My head's swollen. I'm getting the shit kicked out of me. I'm kicking the shit out of people. It's an every night occurrence. And I use some crank. And oh my God. I don't yell at anybody, and I don't want to fight anybody, It's like 2 days into this deal, I found out. It's not alcohol anymore. I'll just use speed every day, all day long, And in my mind, this is totally cool. This is me running the show. This is great, And the problem with that is that, we all know how that turns out. You go 2-3 years without eating and sleeping, and something bad's going to happen. You know what I mean? And it did. It totally did. We ended up homeless. I was no longer providing for my family. We were living on North Temple. I was running around with people that I would not run around with sober. I would abandon Chanel and the kids for days at a time. I was a shell of a person and was pretty okay with it. It was pretty all right. It was okay to hang out with guys named Gumby who were fucking wanted on the FBI's list, and it was this insane deal, and it was totally okay for me to live at the Gateway Hotel in North Temple while the Mormon bishop paid for that. I was totally fine. I was totally okay with it. It was totally okay for me to leave her and my twin sons, who were 2-3 years old, for days at a time. Totally. That's what I did. And I blotted it out, just like the book talks about. I blotted it out and blotted it out and blotted it out. And I was going to do it to the end. And a strange thing happened. All of a sudden, I could not get relief no matter what I did. I don't know. You know that feeling when you have to drink or you have to use no matter what, and you get to drink and you get to use and it all goes away, and for like 3 hours everything's fine. Well, I would get to that point and then I would use, and my mind, I became more insane after I used. And I remember being there, and it's kind of like when this book talks about a jumping off place. That's where I was at. Because there's no way I could live. I could not live without it. I could not live without it. I didn't know what the hell was going to happen. Thank God for that. Because somewhere in that, and all that mess, and all that addiction, and all the pain, something was planted in my head that says, you're not going to live this way. You can't live this way, I didn't know it at the time, but it was the beginning of my last run, and it took about 3 weeks to take place. 3 weeks. And I knew the meth was killing me, and I was just, God, if I could just get back to alcohol. If I was just looking back, like if I could just get back to when I would drink and beat the shit out of somebody or get ran over by somebody, and my life was so good then. You know what I mean? And I remember these thoughts, and I meant them. They were in my heart. So all I wanted was to get back to that point to where I had a semi-normal life, when there was no more, stolen cars in the Gateway Hotel and days at a time and, all that shit. I just wanted to get back to that and show up. And this whole time I've kept the same job, doing the same thing. And I'm talking going into work 3 or 4 or 5 days up, looking like Skeletor. I mean, it was bad news. Acting like Skeletor, just a nut job, you know what I mean? And finally, I get a boss who says, you know what, something's not right. I knew what that meant. I totally knew what that meant. So he said, we want you to go down and for a drug test. And I said, oh yeah, give me the slip. I'll be going down there. I'll go right down. And he's like, yeah, right. You're going down with me type deal. That kind of freaked me out. I didn't know what to do. Looking back at it now, it was like I was on railroad tracks. There was no stopping what was going to happen. There was no stopping what was going to happen. Get there, give him the sample, walk out of there with a weight off of my shoulders that I can't explain. It was like somewhere inside of me, it was finally like, oh my God, this might end. This is going to end, Call Chanel, tell her what's going on. I'm coming straight home. We don't have a car. We don't have anything else. I'm coming straight home. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200, And somehow I ended up at a dope house. I don't know how it all took place, It was like I was going there. And I got there and I used, and for the first time in a couple months, when I used, it was off the chain. And I think it was about a week straight, all day, all night, no sleep. And, this terrible feeling inside of me, like, this is the end. This is it. No more. It's done. There was something, my soul was telling me that it was over. And I don't mean the using, I'm talking the whole deal, because the effect that was produced was just when I think about it, I think about like wringing a rag out. That's how I felt inside, just this terrible pain. Anyways, she finally finds me. It was like she pulls me out of this deal. We go home, we crash, that's it. And I wake up and something had totally happened. And I didn't know what it was. I did not know what it was, They get the results, they send it in, you got to go to rehab. You don't go to rehab, you don't have this job. And like I said, we're not living right, you know what I mean? We have nothing to our names. And something told me that no matter what, it was going to be okay. If I just didn't use and if I just didn't drink, and the funny thing is, I had never been in an AA meeting. All the shit that I had done, all the people that I had affected, all the times I had drove drunk, I had never been to an AA meeting. Never. I had never heard of Alcoholics Anonymous. Never. I hadn't. So I get to this, I do an assessment. The guy there that runs the treatment center said, from now until you start, you need to get to an AA meeting. Oh, no, I'm willing to do anything but that. That doesn't sound right, you know. I'm different. I'm an addict. I don't need any of that stuff. He says, all right, whatever. Just show up to rehab, you know. And the night that I show up, the first night that I show up, I'm in this group. I hate the counts where I hate everybody in there. I'm angry Frank. That's what I need to do. And out of the blue, I did fifth step work with a group of people that I never even knew. And I mean, it came out, and I was trying to, oh my God, no, what's going on, you know? And that relief, the same relief that I had that night that I drank that booze, happened to me. And I didn't know it at the time. I didn't say, oh God, I'm going to do this, but I felt that relief. That day, after doing that fifth step work that I didn't even know was fifth step work, they had an AA meeting at that place, and I went to a meeting, and there was a guy that shared about killing somebody drunk, going to prison, getting out, and changing his life around. And he had 4 or 5 years sober. And I understood that. I understood that lingo. I understood what he was talking about. And I'm not going to horse shit around. I was sold. I was bona fide sold. I was going to do this thing. My soul was telling me to do it. You know, I was alive. You know, something was going to change in my life. And it totally did. I look back at that time of my life, and I just was so, I don't know, it's a cool deal. Getting clean and sober is a very powerful thing, you know. What transpired for me was I took what they told me to do and I did it. And I'm usually not one of those folks that does that stuff, but for whatever reason I was this time. And I went to meetings and they talked about sponsorship, and I worked the 12 steps, and I had a spiritual experience because of those 12 steps that made me the best man I had ever been. I maintained sobriety, keep going along, get to about 5 or 6 years clean and sober, president of AA, doing everything they say to do and doing it better than anybody says they can do it. And the next thing I know, I just start getting resentful, like crazy. You know, this one's not staying sober because he's not taking the steps, and this one's doing this. And I'm sitting in these meetings, and I'm just going crazy in my head. And stop being sponsor myself, but continue to sponsor people, you know. If you're doing that or you want to do that, talk with me after. It didn't end well for me. Get to a point that I become so bitter that I'm doing very few meetings a week. When I do them, I get there late, leave early. I won't help people. I mean, it's just this very self-centered, angry person, but just clean and sober, you know. Not using alcohol, not using meth, not using whatever, but angry, clean, and sober. And, man, that does not feel good. Pick up the drink, and it was about 2 years ago. Yeah, about 2 years ago. Basically make myself drink in a way, you know, because I just kept fighting it back and forth, and so I drank in a very, I always thought to drink was to die. So I drank, and it was like I was just, impending doom, I was just kind of waiting. At some point the meteor's going to hit the earth, or, you know, the Syrians are going to drop a bomb, or a busload of nuns is going to run through the, you know, snowbird and kill somebody, and it didn't happen. It did not happen. And that progressed and progressed and progressed. Get to a point to where I become so lonely and bitter that I can't drink anymore, but my ego will not allow me to go to AA. It's like, oh, no. You're not going to go back there, you know. And thank God I had a handful of people in my life that totally stuck it out with me, that continued to call me, that used with me, you know, but we had this bond that happened in AA because that's where we met and that's where we got close, all being clean and sober, that wasn't dropped. And I'm so grateful for those people today. I am so grateful that I had people that continued to call me while I was using, even though they were clean and sober. You know, one thing I will never, the hand of AA is my hand, and I always want it to be there, and I don't care if somebody's drinking or using today. It doesn't matter to me. Totally doesn't matter to me. I'm wrapping it up real quick. Kind of slide back into AA, going to meetings, not admitting that I'm alcoholic. My ego is totally preventing me from doing any of that. I mean, I'm going to meetings and I'm still thinking in my head, but I'm not alcoholic. I'm different than these people. I can control it. I can this, I can that. And just surface stuff, just going to meetings, not talking to people, not, and today I believe it was my spirit trying to keep me connected to this deal. Because in between meetings, I'd go and buy like a pint of vodka. Or I'd drink a fifth of vodka and have, 10 war tabs and think that was totally normal. You know what I mean? People drink like this all the time. What are you talking about, And it's just this, when the book talks about cunning, baffling, and powerful, those words, look them up in the dictionary. Look them up in the dictionary, because I can tell you, I lived it. I lived drinking and telling myself that it was everything except for alcohol. It was not alcohol. It was her. It was my job. It was those fuckers in AA. It was this. It was that. It was never about the booze. As I would drink it and drink it and drink it, and it was never about the booze. And then if your ego is anything like mine, I'd go a week at a time before I'd have the next drunk, and that week is my proof. That week was 7 days without drinking, I'm here to tell you, if you're going to hear a lot in AA about how people drink, their bottoms are worse than everybody's bottoms. You're going to hear that. That's not the case, and it doesn't have to be the case. The best definition that I had about being an alcoholic is, can you control it? Can you control alcohol? Do you know how many you're going to drink when you drink? And the other thing is, does bad shit happen to you when you drink? And I said, I can sort of control it, to this first sponsor. And I said, and then bad stuff does happen. And he says, well, why do you continue to drink then? If you're getting hit in the face with a baseball bat when you're drunk, and it's because you're drunk, why are you ever picking up another drink again? Well, I could go story for story about shit that's happened to me drunk that never happened to me sober. I never got stabbed sober. I did when I was drunk. I never got hit in the face with a bat sober, but I did when I was drunk. I never got ran over. We could just keep going and going. But here I continue to drink, and it's not alcohol. It's not alcohol. Alcohol is never the problem when I'm actively drinking, Today I work a good program for me, and it's a lot different than any other program I've ever worked. I have a circle of men that I call the Jedi Council that I go to. For the new folks, you're going to find good ones that know how to do finances good. They're going to know how to do relationships good. They're going to know how to do fellowship good, bookwork good. I haven't found the one that has them all together yet. You know what I mean? I'm totally not going to go for relationship stuff to a person in the fellowship that's been married 6 times. I'm just not going to do it. You know what I mean? I've been married once. We could get close to 20. I'm not going to go to somebody who has 6 wives. I just won't do it. Or had 6 wives. It's not my deal. My point is, I believe that it's better to have a group of people that you rely upon than just having one person that you can talk to. And sponsorship is a huge part of my story. Today I actively have 2. I have one guy who means the world to me just because he teaches me how to help other people. That's what he does. And not necessarily in the rooms, he just does it as a way of life. And the other, the new guy who I've had for about 2 weeks now, I call him, I tell him what I do, he tells me how to fix it, and we hang up the phone. And that's the relationship that we have. And I totally love it, because my ego doesn't want butterflies and rainbows when I screw up. My ego needs somebody to say, this is how you fix it, go and do it. And then he hangs up the phone, and I go, okay, cool, I can do that, I'm grateful for that today. I have a program that's not solely based in this book, and I know a lot of people will become upset by that, but I totally believe Bill Wilson when he said that we don't own this thing, we don't have a monopoly on it. If you look at what the founders did initially, they went out. They tried so much crazy shit, to be honest with you. They really did. They tried a lot of stuff. But it was always in search of that spiritual experience. And today, that's how I try to live. I really do. And I'm not trying to blow that thing up into a grandiose story, but I meditate now. I didn't do that for 9 years. I could not do that. I would not do that. I try to work prayer in. That's hit and miss for me. I always talk to an alcoholic, and I always try to be transparent. Those are the things that I do try to do on a daily basis to stay spiritually fit, And I can tell you what's happened. Not only when I work program does the drink go away, but I get so happy. I'm content. I can deal with my wife. I can deal with the kids. I can deal with employees. I can deal with bosses. I can deal with myself, most importantly. I'm okay with who I am today. When I don't do those things and I'm not trying to live a spiritual life, it's bad news. It is bad news. I act a fool. I hurt people's feelings. I hurt myself. Only an alcoholic and an addict can say, we can say, have this spiritual kit of tools or die an alcoholic death. and we go, well, how bad is that alcoholic death really going to be, you know? That's the deal for me. I'm grateful to be here, and thanks for letting me share, you guys.